So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we came about feeding commercial diet to our pets, because home cooking or home prepared diets are the most common way of feeding cats in many parts of the world, not in this part of the world. The first home commercial diet appeared in the Sorry That Cookies covering the year, 1860s. And James Pratt was inspired by the food that seamen ate when they did the transatlantic voyage between America and England. And they were feeding these cookies, so he made this sort of cookie for dogs. And he was very successful. Some other important dates on commercial foods are the first therapeutic diet, which is Hill's KD. I don't know if there's anybody from Hill's here. They might have told you the story about Buddy, who was a seeing eye dog who got kidney disease. And then Dr. Morris created the prototype for KD, and then they found a canning company to put it into a can, and the canning company was Hill's. And that's how the company came up. So that was the first one in the 1948. Another important date is 1957, which is what we call the birth of modern pet nutrition, with the first extruded or kibble diet. And that was put in a dog chow, which is still on the market. This diet has been there forever, and it will be there forever, it seems. And from there on, this is an industry that's been growing constantly. And in Europe, FIDIAF data shows that there was a 15 billion euro turnover in 2014. And we know that in Northern Europe, Australia, Japan, North America, most of the calories that dogs and cats consume come from commercial diets. So in these areas of the world, home prepared diet or home cooking is marginal or small. It does feel like it's growing, and I don't know if it's because I live in California, which people like natural things and stuff like that, but we do a lot of home cooked diets at all, definitely. So what reasons can have someone for home cooking? For me, the struggle to understand that, because I hate cooking, hate it. Like, I'm lucky I have a husband who doesn't, and he cooks for me. I would eat pizza every night. But some people like it, so that's one reason. People like to cook, and they like to cook for their pets because they're family. We're talking about humanization, and I don't have kids, I have a cat. Like all my friends with kids show me pictures of their kid, and I show them pictures of my cat. Some of them get upset, but I'm just trying to empathize here. So give us a break. So some people, at least in Spain, for example, where I worked for many years, they feel it's cheaper. They feel it's cheaper because they just give the leftovers of what the humans are eating. It's really not cheaper if you actually do the numbers, and if you do it properly with all the supplements for the nutrients, then it's definitely more expensive. So that's kind of a misconception. Some people enjoy it, as I said. Some people mistrust commercial foods. They don't understand the ingredient list. They think they're using cheap ingredients and try to, they feel commercial diets are there to make money, not to keep their pet healthy. So they just mistrust them and rather prepare their food. They might wish to feed a natural diet to their pets. They might follow their personal beliefs, and Marge was talking about vegetarian diets. That would be an example. I think one of the trickiest cases I had, it was an owner who was a Buddhist, who didn't believe in hurting any life at all. So unless you feed rocks to your cat, I think that was really hard. And I had a cat. I mean, you should have a rabbit, I think, in those cases. But I mean, in the end, we make it work. We made the owner understand that it wasn't working in the favor of his cat. But definitely people like to feed their pets how they feed themselves. And in some cases, commercial foods are not palatable to a specific pet. So we made a homemade diet. And some cases, you cannot find a commercial diet that's adequate for the pet. And that's mostly in cases of several diseases that are going on. Kidney disease and food allergy and pancreatitis. So good luck finding a commercial diet that might work for that condition. So that's why we can home cook. So how do I formulate home cooked diets? Home cooking is what I do every day, or I prepare the recipes for. And most of our patients are dogs or cats with disease that need a special diet. So the first thing we need to know is we need to know the energy requirements and nutrient requirements for each species and each life stage. And I do dogs and cats. I do apologize, I don't know anything about other species, but the concepts are the same. for a pig or a horse or a dog, right? We need to know what they need. Depending on the species you work with, that knowledge is more or less established or in depth. So for dogs and cats, we have quite a good knowledge, although there's gaps. But for other species, we really don't know all the essential nutrients, the amounts that are needed, etc. If you have a disease, you need to know which modifications you need to do to that diet for that disease. Kidney disease, we need to drop the phosphorus, control the potassium, control the protein, sodium. So that's the knowledge that you need. That's why we get board certified people. You need to know if some nutrients are toxic, and we know that. We have a safe upper limit for several of these nutrients. And then we need to know what's in the food, right? So if I want to feed nutrients to my dog or my cat, I need to combine different ingredients to provide them. So I need to know what's in those ingredients in order to make the diet. So it's quite simple in concept. So what are these nutrients that they need? And I'll go over this very briefly, but we have macro and micronutrients, and that depends on the amount that we add them to the food. So protein would be a macronutrient. We need it in large amounts, and it provides nitrogen and essential amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Fat's another macronutrient that, besides being yummy and providing energy density, also provides essential fatty acids from the omega-6 and 3 families. And the last macronutrient is carbohydrates, which are technically not essential, as Marge talked about. They have their job. They're beneficial to be included, but they basically only provide energy, starch or sugars. These three nutrients are the ones that provide energy, and as Marge said, has to come from one of these three: protein, fat, or digestible carbohydrates. We also need vitamins. Here are all of them. We also need minerals, macro minerals and trace elements. And then there's fiber. Fiber is technically a macronutrient, but it doesn't provide energy. So it's a non-digestible carbohydrate. Again, technically not essential for dogs and cats. It is essential for herbivorous species like the rabbit. But we include it in diets for their benefits for intestinal health. I mean, all of you know, everybody has a fiber requirement, really, for proper intestinal health. So it's about 40 essential nutrients that dogs and cats need, or humans. Varies a little bit between species, life stage, etc. So when we call a diet complete and balanced, that's what we mean. We mean that these 40 nutrients are there, and that the amount of energy provided by the diet is adequate for the pet. So this is a bit of an explanation of what I said before. We need to provide the nutrient in enough amount. So if we provide very little of the nutrient, we see deficiency signs. And if we provide a lot of the nutrient, we might see toxic signs. So some nutrients that we might see toxicity is vitamin D or selenium. Those are classical that we might see a problem. But for many nutrients, what we call the adequate zone is really, really large. So for example, we don't have a safe upper limit for protein or for potassium for a healthy pet, right? That's why we have, I would say, thousands or millions of commercial diets out there that are all different, because you have a really wide area which would be adequate, and you have all these 40 nutrients to cover. So when I do a home-cooked diet, what do I use to get this knowledge that I need? For the NRC would be one of them. NRC has nutrient requirements for a lot of species, including dogs and cats, which is this one, but also horses, rabbits, birds, whatever you want. AFCO is the association of American feed control officials that also have tables, and FEDIAF, you might be familiar with FEDIAF, has nutrient requirements. The good thing about the FEDIAF tables is that they are free. You can go to their website and you can get the requirements. They have a dogs and cats, and they have a rabbit nutrient requirements that you can check. NRC is not cheap or free. So we need to do assumptions when we use this information, right? This is current knowledge, and it's likely incomplete. I'm pretty sure that in 20 years' time, we will be doing things differently because new knowledge is coming regarding nutrient requirements for different species. This only applies for healthy pets. So for modifications, you need to go to the literature. And some species, we have more information than others. So that's definitely a big limitation. And how do we find the other information? Where do I get what's in the feedstuffs? We use databases. So in the US, we use the USDA database, but all countries have a national food database for humans that we use. I think the UK one, it's called Food Data Banks. But there's one in Spain, there's one in France. You can look up yours. It's better to use the one that's local, because a yogurt here, it's not the same as a yogurt in California. I know. They put sugar everywhere in that country. These are handled with care situations. The limitations of using databases are large. So you need to assume they reflect reality. I need to assume that the chicken composition is the same chicken that my client is gonna buy. And that's a huge assumption. So you need to really know your database and feel comfortable with it in order to make decisions. The weirder the ingredient, the truest this is. Like, you have some clients, I want to use the blackfish from Alaska as a protein source. And then you go to the database and you say, you only have one sample. So you have to rely in one lab analyzing one time, one sample of that fish to make nutritional decisions, right? That's hard. Digestibility and bioavailability, we're assuming dogs and cats will use them in the same way that humans do, although most of the human data comes actually from pigs. So everything's kind of incestuous at this point. But you're assuming this. You could make a diet look good on paper using shoes and bamboo, probably. But that won't be digestible or bioavailable. Some ingredients are missing. I would say the classical, a lot of people want to use sometimes carcasses or chicken necks. People don't eat those, so they are not in the database. People don't eat chicken necks. So you are limited on the ingredients that you can use. And you can also be missing nutrients. Vitamin D is a classic because it's very expensive to measure. So it's lacking in many databases. Taurine isn't there because it's not an essential nutrient for humans. So those are big limitations. And then you need to know them well in order to make a diet. So here's my summary a little bit of the talk. What are the pros and cons of home cooking compared to commercial? And I always say good commercial diets of companies that do good quality control and test their diets, okay? So the pros of feeding a commercial diet is that I think the thing I like the best about them is that you can test them. So you have a commercial diet, you can actually feed it to dogs and cats or whoever before you sell it to people. You can do digestibility, you can test palatability, you can do energy. You cannot do that with a home-cooked diet by definition, right? You're experimenting with your client or patient at that point. Some companies will say that they don't do animal feeding tests because they find that unethical, but in the end, they're testing it with your pet when they're selling you a diet that they haven't tested. So I like testing. They have years of experience feeding pets. They have their own databases, so good companies analyze their ingredients, and they can rely more heavily on them. They're more homogeneous, for example, in pets with diabetes, that we rely on a consistent diet to adjust to the insulin. We really like commercial. And they're usually cost-effective, especially if you feed dry. Home-cooked diet might be cheaper than canned, but it's never cheaper than dry. As a negative home-cooked diet of commercial diets, you cannot customize it to the patient. So if I have a patient with kidney disease, but also hyperkalemic and has some hyperlipidemia, then it's harder to find a commercial diet that would adapt fully to the pet, right? So those are really the benefits of home cooking, that you can fully customize it. I can choose ingredients that the pet likes, that the owner can buy, that I rely the information on. And I can put things where I want them, up to a point, of course. Potentially more palatable, and overall they're more digestible than commercial diets. And we like that in some cases, like short bowel syndrome, or in some cases of IBD, we might like that. High digestibility, although some other cases will benefit from fiber and less digestibility. What are the negatives? They're costly in time and in money. If they're not properly formulated, you might see disease related to deficiencies, cannot be tested, and we're mimicking strategies. So when I do a home-cooked diet for kidney disease, all the research that's out there, it's for commercial diets. So I'm just looking at it and say, okay, I'll do the same, right? Without the testing behind it. Diet drift is a big problem, and diet drift is when I give a recipe to an owner, and then 6 months later, the owner tells me what they are feeding, and then you compare both things, and you want to cry a little bit, because what happened? Oh, that pill was way too big, I'm not giving it. Or oh, he doesn't like the chicken anymore, I'm giving beef. And you're like, Jesus. Right. It happens. Generic recipes are specifically risky, and I don't like them or recommend them from books or online. There's some online resources that are good that I can give you, but if you go to WikiHow, the recipes there are horrible. I think the biggest problem I have with generic recipes is what's the point? So if the best thing about home cooking is that I can make it more customized to my patient, to their circumstances, disease, etc., why do I get the generic recipe? I don't get that benefit. Who's formulating that? I get hundreds of questions about, oh, I'm giving this diet from this book and it's not working. What can I do? I said, just ask the person who wrote it. I didn't, right? What happens if you have a problem? If you recommend one of these diets and the pet has an issue, it's probably your fault because you cannot go to the book writer and tell them, dude, what happened? And who formulates that? Sometimes you find things. One of my favorites is I really love my dogs. That's were the credentials of the formulator. I don't know in this world that facts don't matter anymore, I guess, but I don't know. They might be outdated. Some recipes out there have been out there since the 70s. And we have moved forward. We have more knowledge regarding both healthy and diseased pets. So you might be using recipes that are not up to date. They tend to be either very complex, like with an ingredient list that's 20 ingredients long, or very simple, like 30% carbs, 60% protein, and that's an issue. They might be vague. They give very little calorie guidance about how much to feed to your specific pet. They just give you batch amounts sometimes. And potentially problematic ingredients, and this is the king. Garlic is everywhere because apparently it's magical and it kills fleas, which is, neither of those things are true, although it is yummy. But it is toxic to dogs, as you'll hear later, I guess, and cats, so don't feed it. This is an example of a recipe for a cat with kidney disease, so I'm not going to go over it, but some of the issues I have, for example, 115 grams of liver. Is this in raw amount or in cooked amount? Is this chicken liver, beef liver? Vegetable oil. Is this coconut oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, olive oil? They're very different in their essential fatty acid composition. My favorite, balanced supplement that meets AFCO-FILAN requirements. I think that's a big call to tell the owner, just, find that. Or even a vet, right? Which one, really? It's really hard, and that doesn't really exist. It's a bit of a unicorn. So I did an assumption. So I assumed this was chicken liver. I used olive oil, and I used this pill that I found online. And I found that this diet was deficient in amino acids, deficient in biotin, copper, potassium, and zinc. So, and this was from a book, from a veterinary book. So it was not even a recipe made by someone who has no training at all, right? So careful with them. There's some other things. There's this recipe that says 2 parts carbohydrate, 1 part protein, 5% oil, and 5% veggies, and a multivitamin. That's one of those simple recipes that are out there. So I did 2 versions of it, one using chicken, one using beef, different oils. And for this type of patient, these are the deficiencies I found. And this, I just wanted to show you that many of them were the same deficiencies. And then I used different ingredients. So sometimes the idea that it's not complete today, so I'm not giving iron today, but I'll give it tomorrow with a varied diet, it's really not true. These are the usual suspects. We always see deficiencies with the same ones. So variety is not going to protect you. This is also the calories coming from each macronutrient, and the diet with chicken had, 30% fat. The diet with ground beef was almost 50% fat. This is a Mac burger, double cheese, fries, and mayonnaise on top. This is super high fat. Some dogs will not tolerate it. Here's some literature for you to look at it. These are papers that have looked at recipes online and on books and for different diseases and health. None of them are really adequate. I guess I made my point. Typical problems that we see with home-cooked diets or home-prepared diets are rickets. This is an example of it. Calcium and vitamin D deficiency. We see linoleic acid deficiency. They come with skin disease. Zinc deficiency, same. Calorie imbalance. Vitamin D excess, we've also seen. Taurine deficiency in cats, we've seen them come blind or with cardiomyopathy, even if they feed an all-meat diet. So what do you do when you see a patient feeding a home-cooked diet? You try to ask these questions. Is there a protein source? Is it animal or vegetable? Vegetable are way more riskier than animal. Is there a source of essential fatty acids? This has to be there if the protein source comes from a ruminant, because they don't have essential fatty acids in there, or if the protein source is very lean, like chicken breast. Is there a source of calcium? And it's never enough. A yogurt or some cheese is never enough for a dog or a cat. They need way more. Is there a taurine source for cats? Is there a micronutrient source for vitamins and trace elements? Still no warranty of adequacy, even if the answers to these questions are all yes, but it's a bit less worrisome. So if you need more information, you can get a software analysis. There's some programs out there. Most of them you have to pay though. You can send the diet to a lab. But if I send this diet to a lab to get 40 nutrients analyzed, I might spend 2,000 pounds, and I still don't know anything about bioavailability. The easiest is to consult a nutritionist, that they have the software, so you don't have to pay extra for that. And they can evaluate that for you. So when do we consider homemade diets? I guess these are the main reasons for me where they are adequate. No? The patient won't eat a commercial diet that's adequate for him or her. Patient has multiple diseases. Some electrolyte abnormalities we can control with home-cooked diets. My main experience is with hyperkalemia in kidney disease in patients that we are giving ACE inhibitors. And sometimes they get hyperkalemic even with the lowest potassium diet in the market, so we make them even lower. Feline idiopathic hypercalcemia, you can also try to drop the calcium a bit more. Need for severe fat restriction, hyperlipidemia in the schnauzer, lymphangiectasia in Yorkies. Sometimes even the lowest fat diet in the market won't be enough. So we can make them even lower in fat when we home cook. Or when we need very high digestibility, like short bowel syndrome. So my recommendation is that in those cases you do consult with a specialist. You can go to esvcn.eu, evvs.eu, or acvn.org and find them. Dr. Chandler consults in the UK and does this for vets now, Glasgow, I think. So she's a person that you can consult as well. We in Davis see cases from all over the world, and we're happy to work with everybody, mostly. So to sum it up, the do's, what do we do? Do recommend home-cooked diets when there are no commercial available options. I think that's a good thing to recommend to owners. But do consult a specialist. I think that's why we have specialists, right? This is a complex, it's not easy to make it complete and balanced, especially if the pet has multiple diseases. So do consult with a specialist that can help you out. We do recommend them that they come twice a year instead of once a year if they're healthy pets, because as I said, we cannot test them, right? So we are a bit more careful about seeing issues with these diets. Don't use generic recipes from the internet or books. There are some websites run by diplomates like balanceit.com, petdiets.com that you can rely on. But don't just Google them or take them from a book, because all of the reasons that I said before. Use recipes formulated by veterinarians and specialized in nutrition. There's a lot of recipes out there formulated by lay people that might be problematic. And don't allow diet drift to occur. And to do that, you need to get a good diet history every time they come to your clinic to make sure that what you recommended is still being followed. Not different from drugs or any other management that you do with your pet. That said, thank you very much. And